breaking news with Julian Assange. This is a pretty short story, but a very important one. Apparently, it was yesterday, Julian Assange has finally been granted the chance to appeal extradition. So it is official now that he's been granted that chance to appeal extradition. It was not official before, but now it is. So you can hear that when coming here from people. This is ABC Australia, and Stella was also present to discuss this with the press as well. Listen to this.
At the 11th hour, Britain's High Court delivers for Julian Assange. The 52-year-old too unwell to hear the good news himself.
The judges reached the right decision. We spent a long time hearing the United States putting lipstick on a pig, but the judges did not fly it.
For the past 5 years, he's fought his extradition to the US from behind bars in London's Belmarsh prison.
I just want to add here, too, for those who are not aware, Julian Assange physically is still not doing well. So I know people have asked about this before. He's still not in good condition physically.
Two of Britain's most senior judges were comfortable the WikiLeaks founder wouldn't face the death penalty, but weren't convinced he'd be guaranteed the same free speech protections as a US citizen.
It's good news because the court accepted the appeal, but it's a kind of bittersweet news because still we don't know when the appeal will take place.
He's wanted in America on 18 criminal charges for obtaining, receiving and publishing classified documents about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Outside court, loyal supporters showed their joy and relief at the court's decision. This is a legal victory for Julian Assange, but it doesn't guarantee his freedom nor stop his eventual extradition to the United States.
Yes, so that was the part I really wanted people to hear. I don't want people to assume that this means that Julian Assange will be free. That is not necessarily the case here. That is something that his family is still fighting for. But one thing I do want to add that I've thought about over the years, if Julian Assange would have published war crimes that were committed by, let's say, Iran and not the United States government, would Julian Assange be in prison? I want to remind you, Julian Assange has not been formally charged with the crime. He is basically sitting in Belmarsh, which is one of the more harsher prisons, to wither away. That's something I think we should think about.
He's not free. He's not free. He's still in the belly of the beast.
We just want him free now. He shouldn't be in there anyway. His poor family suffering more. He just shouldn't be there. He should be released.
Assange's brother Gabriel Shipton flew from Australia for the hearing. He's now travelling to the United States to lobby Congress to drop the case.
The only way that this is going to come to a quick conclusion is through the Australian government's advocacy and them using their coercive leverage with the United States to get Julian home.
For now, Julian Assange remains behind bars until yet another court hearing is set. Catherine Diss, ABC News, London.
So again, yes, Julian Assange is still in Belmarsh. Now, the appeal decision is some good news. I don't know why. I'm sorry, guys. It's making me log in again. Is some good news, but I do want people to understand the long-term goal. Eric, the article it's asking for a sign-in. Can you handle this? There's something I want to show you guys from Chris Hedges about this article. Yeah, it was asking me to sign in. I didn't have to sign in earlier, but now I do. Okay, there it is. All right, so Chris Hedges actually explains this really well. I want you guys to understand what this is basically, what they're basically trying to do in the courts with Julian Assange. The slow motion execution of Julian Assange continues. The ruling by the High Court in London permitting Julian Assange to appeal his extradition order leaves him languishing in precarious health in a high security prison. That is the point. Now, this is by Chris Hedges. This was published today. So I want you to think about that for just a second, right? All of these delays that have happened over the years with Julian Assange's case, that's on purpose. The longer they delay this, the more time goes by. And obviously, I told you before, he was not in good health in Belmarsh. They also had him isolated at one point. And then when I spoke to his father and his brother, they said they had finally gotten to the point where he was allowed to mingle with other prisoners, but they kept him in isolation for quite some time. So they are trying to break him down. The decision by the High Court in London to grant Julian Assange the right to appeal the order to extradite him to the United States may prove to be a Pyrrhic victory. It does not mean Julian will elude extradition. This is the point, the part I think everyone really needs to understand. It does not mean the court has ruled, as it should, that he is a journalist whose only crime was providing evidence of war crimes and lies by the U.S. government to the public. It does not mean he will not be released from the high security Belmarsh prison, where it goes on to say the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, after visiting Julian there, said he was undergoing a slow motion execution. So this is the unfortunate part. It does not mean that journalism is any less imperiled. Editors and publishers of 5 international media outlets, the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, El País, and Der Spiegel, which published stories based on documents released by WikiLeaks, have urged the U.S. charges to be dropped and Julian be released. None of those media executives were charged with espionage. It does not dismiss the ludicrous ploy by the U.S. government to extradite an Australian citizen whose publication is not based in the U.S. and charge him with the Espionage Act. It continues the long Dickensian farce that mocks the most basic concepts of due process. The ruling is based on the grounds that the U.S. government did not offer sufficient assurances that Julian would be granted the same First Amendment protections afforded to a U.S. citizen should he stand trial. So that's the important part, right? Because he's not a citizen, they can't guarantee this for him. The appeal process is one more legal hurdle in the persecution of a journalist who should not only be free, but feted and honored as the most courageous of our generation. Yes, he can file an appeal, but this means another year, perhaps longer, in the harsh prison conditions as his physical and psychological health deteriorates. And this has been the plan, folks. They don't want Julian Assange to have a trial in the United States. That would not go well for not just Julian, but that would not go well for the United States government. They don't want that trial here. So what they are trying to do is they are trying to let Julian Assange basically suffer in Belmarsh from the conditions there. And they're trying to just wait this out until Julian Assange will wither away. I'm trying to say this in the most polite way possible, but I'm just keeping it real with you guys. This is what they're trying to do. This way, they don't have to deal with the trial or anything at all. He spent 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy because the UK and Swedish governments refused to guarantee that he wouldn't be extradited to the United States, even though he agreed to return to Sweden and to aid a preliminary investigation that was eventually dropped. The judicial lynching of Julian was never about justice. The plethora of legal irregularities, including the recording of his meetings with attorneys by the Spanish security firm UC Global at the embassy on behalf of the CIA, alone should have seen the case thrown out of court, as it eviscerates attorney-client privilege. The U.S., here we go, has charged Julian with 17 acts under the Espionage Act and 1 count of computer misuse for an alleged conspiracy to take possession of and then publish national defense information. If found guilty on all these charges, he faces 175 years in a U.S. prison, which is not what they want to happen. Again, they do not want that trial to take place here. But I think what's important for people to grasp from this is, again, Julian Assange has not been convicted. Julian Assange has not been found guilty. He is sitting in a pretty much maximum security prison under cruel, harsh conditions, while government officials just twiddle their thumbs in hopes that he just succumbs to some type of illness while he's in that prison due to the harsh conditions and dies. This is the grand scheme of things. Others were able to get a break, right? Edward Snowden, he left the country, can't come back here, but he left the country and he left with his life and still has his life. Chelsea Manning has her life. Yes, she went to prison, but Chelsea Manning is still out there today. But Julian Assange, I feel like the government has tried to make an example out of him in particular. He's not the only political prisoner. There's Mumia. I think Daniel Hale has been released now. There's Leonard Peltier for speaking the truth. It's a very dangerous time for people that are truth tellers. Very dangerous time. Now, I do applaud the fact that he did receive, this appeal. I do applaud that. But to Chris Hedges' point, that in itself, this could take a year. So our government is just hoping that Julian Assange dies and that he'll just disappear. That's what our government is hoping. That's what I want people to understand. And they hope that after Julian Assange passes away, people will pretend as if he was never an issue and this never happened. That's right, Terry. Free Leonard Peltier. Actually, he has a trial coming up as well. Actually, the Peltier kids DM'd me about that. I need to look into that as well. I think he's coming up for appeal. But this is what we're dealing with, folks. So shout out to Chris Hedges for putting that into perspective, because I know when I heard that news, I was really happy and excited, but I didn't know what it really meant in the longer, scheme of things. But then when Chris explained it in his article, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what they're really trying to do. It's a hot mess. I sincerely hope that Julian Assange can hang in there. I just don't know how much more of this he can take.